Hello, everybody, and welcome to my channel. Today was a pre-Christmas gift for me because Bricks Builder has released the version 1.6.1 with the new CSS Grid layout, something that I've been waiting for a long time. I've been working with ACSS lately and seeing how Grid are working in it and see the code that it outputs and things like that. And I was longing to work with CSS Grid directly inside of Brick as well. So you can see, of course, in their changelog what it does, and you have an article that they point you to, which is this one, where you have more information about what is a CSS grid and how to use it. So I encourage you to go and read that. Honestly, I didn't have the time to do so. Long day, a lot of things happening today, but still wanted to give you my little point of view on that new grid layout because I've seen some videos trying to explain it. Sometimes it does a pretty decent job. Sometimes it adds to the confusion in my point of view. So I'm trying to give you a different perspective on that. So first of all, like I said, go there, read that documentation, and hopefully it will help you grasp a little bit of it. I can also point you to the W3 Schools website. If you don't know about that website, this is a place where you can learn HTML, CSS, JavaScript, and other web languages. Good reference. So in the reference section for CSS, you have all the grid elements that you can add, and you can test it for yourself, clicking on that, and you can test specific code here to help you see it and how it would render. The other thing I would point you to, and I'm going to put the links below the video, the other thing that I would point you to is the Pinegrow course on grids. And this is the best resource. I think that it's really helping me. It has helped me to understand how grid is working. Still haven't done it completely, but I think I've done it in the past couple of years ago. So anyway, and it really helps you understand how it works and of course see the video, and that will be my basis to show you how it works in Bricks as well. So first of all, I'm going to point you to the Pinegrow uh, WordPress plugin. The new Pinegrow WordPress plugin was released this week or last week, don't remember exactly. And the simple reason why I point you to that one is that it is more visual, so to help you more understand how grid are working. After that, we're going to go inside Bricks to show you how to do something similar. So we have a grid layout here. What I have is one section with 7 different divs inside of it, and I've put block 1 to 7 inside of them so that we can better understand it. And as you can see, by default, this is the default layout, we have 3 different columns here, or 3 different sections inside of it, okay, inside of the grid, and it has a height of 100 pixels. That's the default of how it works in Pinegrow. You see that my first row is a little bit taller than my other. That's simply because it has 100 pixels, and since it takes more space than the effective space that I have in one row, the others are set automatically to auto depending on the size of the content, in other words. So if I double click on that and switch that to auto, you see that now also my first row takes auto, so they are all identical. So you can set a value, you can set auto, you can set pixels, you can set RAMs, you can set different things here. And I don't want to go too deeply into that because other resources do it well as well. So I want to focus on things that are maybe a little bit less clearer, let's say it like that. We work with fractions in grids, okay? So that's why you see 1FR. This is the base unit of measurement for grids. So the FR, so the fraction. So right now we have 3 columns. Let's say it like that. We have 3 fractions. This would be the right term. So it divides the space available into 3 spaces or 3 fractions. In other words, since every one of them is using 1 fraction and we have 3, then one each of them is 1/3. So you see that it takes 1/3 of the entire width, no matter how big or small. If I hide that, no matter how big or small the width is, it will always take the third. Each block or each div will take the third of the entire row, as you can see. Of course, now it doesn't have enough space for the text, so that's why I have a little scroll bar here, but this is how it works. So, uh, fractions. That's a little bit complicated to understand, but it works with lines. And again, if you go inside this tutorial, it will explain to you how it works. Don't know if it's visual here, no, but inside the video anyway, it's gonna explain everything. But that's why I use Pinegrow Builder to show it to you. You see that when I mouse over here, I have my first line. Okay, my second line is there. You see the little 2 here, my third line, and my fourth line. So even though I have 3 columns, I have 4 lines, 4 section, if I could say it like that. Okay, so it's going from line 1 to line 4, which is each border, it's separator. That's why I've put little borders here around my blocks so that we can see it a little bit better. So my first border, my second one, my third one, and my fourth one here in the blue area. So this is how you will calculate things when we will move our blocks that takes more than its default space. Let's say it like that. More on that later. Same thing horizontally here. You see I have one line there and number 2 here for the second line. So this is how you need to think when you think about the internal elements. But let's go with the overall element first. Okay, so this is already a block. Since I have created a block, let me just remove that so that you can see that by default, this is how it looks. All the blocks will be one on top of the other if I don't have a grid layout, of course. This is how it's going to look into bricks as well. When you first open bricks, if you have something like that, for example, sorry for the French, but it will display flex. But even if you set that to grid, you will see that nothing changes. All right, so we'll come back to that later on. But this is how it looks here in Pinegrow as well. So let me go back to my grid here to create a new grid. And I'm going to, okay, leave it like that. So like I said, this is the default one. Now we have more blocks than what can fit into our 3 columns. Okay, or 3 section, 3 fractions. If I want to add more fractions, let me get rid of those elements here. So if I had another one here, now we have 4 fractions, 5 different lines, remember? So you see that now I can fit 4 blocks into the first row. And I can continue like that until I have all my blocks, if I wanted to, in one row. That would require me having, in this particular case, 7 different columns or 8 different lines, 7 different fractions. Okay, so since we have more blocks than what can fit into one row, if I go back to 3, for example, this is why it goes to the second line or the second row. It creates another row, but officially here I only have one row that is configured. Let's say it like that. I could do the same thing here and specify another row. So now I have more control, and you see that now this one is taller than this one because it doesn't have the auto. It by default in Pinegrow it's set to 100. Okay, but of course I could put it to be different. I could put that to be 300 if I wanted to, and now you see that it takes 300. Every block that is in that row will take 300, and for the other row, the third row that it creates automatically, it goes back to automatic. But if I create a third row, then I will have control over that one. And by default in Pinegrow, it takes the same amount as the previous one. That's why it's 300. But I could set that to 200 if I wanted to. So this is how you would work with rows and with columns with what we call the grid. Now, by default, each block takes one fraction. Okay, you need to specify them. We'll see how to do that in bricks later on. You need to specify that. Okay, so everything taking one fraction right now means that they all have the same size. Okay, I'm going to put it back to auto so that you're not confused with the other rows. Sorry. Now, if I want to, I can set this first one to be two fractions and the other two stay at one fraction. So I don't know if you can see it well, but you will see that the first column is twice as big as column 2 and column 3. In other words, block 1 is the same size as block 2 and 3 together, column 2 and 3 together. That's because it takes two fractions. So in other words, now divides it in 4 instead of 3 in a certain way, and this one takes 2/4, 2/4, and those 1/4. And we can go on like that to expand it. And you will see sometimes that, whoa, we have other numbers than 1 in the others as well. Why? Because, of course, I could say something like that. Let's say 2, 1, and 2. Okay? If I want only the second column to be smaller. But if at some point I wanted to have a different amount, let's say, let me put right here. Come on. Okay. 3 and 2 and 2. What's the difference between 2, 1, 1? Well, it's not exactly the same because, of course, if we divide it, you will see that now this one takes about the third of everything. Okay. 4 will probably be about the same size, twice as big as those two now. Okay. So the higher the number that we put here, the smaller each fraction will be. So you have more control over the exact dimension that you want by putting higher number as well. Okay. So of course you will need to play with that to be able to understand everything, but this is sorry, this is the general principle that you can have there. Now this is true for columns, this is also true for rows. So if I go back to something smaller, let's say I don't know, my computer is freezing a little bit, sorry. 322 or 311. Now I can specify that this first row here, this first column, will be bigger than that. Okay, so if I wanted this first block here to take the entire height, let's say. Now this is where we go from the overall grid to a specific block inside the grid. So let me just click on that div here, and let's forget about that for now. I will simply extend this block here to take two elements. So let me show you what it gives us in CSS. Now you see that my grid area is now 1142. This is just for that specific block here. Okay, well, let me just get rid of that so you can see it better. So my first block takes the first column, but the first column being bigger, it is larger, of course. But in terms of height, it takes the height of 3 rows. And the numbers that you see there are for different element. Let me show you here. It's going to be easier to understand, probably by looking at this here. So we have 4 different possible parameters here. So it can be a span, or in our case, it can be the lines. Remember the lines that we have. Sorry about that, but let me just show that back so that we understand what we are talking about here. Let me just go back to this one here and we show. So here again, we have those little lines. So we refer to those lines when we use the fractions like that. Okay. So what you see here, so instead of using span 2, let me just do it that way. So maybe it's going to be less confusing. So let's say that block 1 here, that means that it starts at row 2. So the first parameter is the row. So it starts at row 2. As you can see here, it doesn't start on the first row. It starts at row 1. So by default, it will be something like that. Row 1, and that this is where it will begin. So the first row, the first column for now, and it spans 2. That means that it spans 2 column width plus the other one. So that's a total of 3 column width. So let me just do it the way that we do it in Pinegrow. Maybe it's going to be less confusing. So if I want to do the same thing, remember that we start at line 1 here, line 2, line 3, line 4, and line 5. So if I say 4 for the lines, so no, sorry. This is the row, this is the column. After that, we have the span of the row. So this one starts at line 1, 2, and 3. So it would be 3. And then the column 1, 2, 3, and 4. So we have where we start for the row, where we end for the row, for the little line that we have like here in Pinegrow. Okay. And then we have the same thing for the column. We start at column 1, we finish at column 4 or line 4. Okay. 1, 2, 3, 4. So if I run that, you see that no changes. So that means that we are okay. Now, let's say that I want to start on the second row like I had previously. Okay. Now, if I start on the second row, I don't want to finish on the third. I will want to finish maybe on the fourth if I want to have the same thing, the same size. And let's keep it like that for the columns. So you see now that my block has moved beneath. Now let's say if I start back at row 1, okay, and I'm gonna stop at line 3 so that I don't go over. But let's say this time that I want to have 3 columns or line finish at this line here. I'm gonna put 3 instead. And you see the size has just changed. And of course, forget about all the others. They will simply reflow according to the space available. So they are all the same. All the others are simply one FR, I guess. Okay, they're all set to auto for the columns. But since we have 4 times auto, that means that we have 4 columns. So 1, 2, 3, and 4. And this one takes 2 column width or fraction, and same thing for the height. So this is how we will work in bricks with the grid area when we want to move one thing over. So let's go see how bricks is working now. So we have something similar here. I have a section with a container, and inside of that I have what, 6 columns. Sorry for the French again. So flex by default, of course, I could set that to be horizontal. They will all be like columns, but then we have less flexibility here. It's trying to put some spacing, going to the width, to change the width, really complicated in flex mode. So instead of that, now we have the display grid that is available for us right in the menu. Don't need to go into the custom CSS anymore. So let's set that to grid. And it has moved in my case because I have probably already some CSS style here. So sorry for that. It shouldn't have moved. So I just want to make sure. Let me reset everything here. All right. So now this is the way it's supposed to be when you activate the grid the first time. So goes from there, and then when I activate the grid, nothing changes because I just tell it that it's a grid, and by default everything takes the entire width again. So now we have the grid columns that appears here underneath when we set that to grid. So the template columns tells us how many columns we will have. Okay, so if I set that to 1FR, for example, I will still have the same thing. We have just one column, so everything takes the entire width. If I say that 2 times, then it divides that in 2. So the first one will go in the first column, then the second one in the second column, and since there's no much space left, then I will go underneath it, and so on. And if I specify another fraction, then I specify 3 columns, and so on, just like we did in Pinegrow. Can do the same thing for rows if I wanted to. Now, of course, we have 2 rows, but just one is defined, in fact. So if I say 1FR, nothing will change because I still have 1 defined. If I put 2FR, then now we don't see it really a change, but we know that we have defined now the second one. And by the way, remember that we could put, instead of FR, which is fraction, we could use something like, I don't know, 2 rems will not make any difference. Maybe 5 rem. I'm going to put that bigger. So you see, we can put other units of measure, pixels, rem, FR, percentage, and so on. So now the first row is different than the second row because I have specified 2 different rows. The first one is rem, the second one is 1FR. But I could specify something like that if I wanted to, and you see that the second one is smaller than the first one still. Of course, if I say 15 instead, now the second one will be bigger. So we have control over each one. But if I just specify 1 unit, specify for the first row, and the other automatic row are set to automatic by default. Okay. Now let me go back here and change the values here for, like we did in Pinegrow, 2 fractions or even 3 fractions instead of 1 for the first one. And the other one takes 1 fraction each, so same size. So this one is now divided in 5. So a little bit like the old grid where we had 12 columns, you can think of it a little bit the same way. Now I don't have 12 columns, I have 5 columns because I have 3 plus 1 plus 1. So it adds to divide the space in 5 columns or 5 fractions. And the first one takes 3 out of 5. So we have 1 left for each of those 2. So 1 out of 5 fraction or column, if it's easier to make you think that way. So in the old bootstrap way, this would be 1 column, and this would be, well, out of 12 doesn't divide by 5, but anyway, this would be something like, I don't know, 6 and then 2, 2, something like that. Now, if I change that to 2 and 2, that means that now this entire row is width, if I should say, is divided into 7 fractions. 3 plus 2 plus 2. And this one is taking 3 out of 7, this one 2 out of 7, and this one 2 out of 7. So this is how you need to think about it if we use the fractions unit of measurement. And of course, you can set a gap if you want to, by the way. So this will make a space between all those elements. In Bricks Builder, we can only set the gap that will set the gap for both columns and rows at the same time. But if you go into CSS, it's possible to do so just for, or specify different value for the columns and for the rows. Let me remove that so that we can focus on what we have there. So this is basically what you have. And again, if I wanted that one to take the 2 rows, it is possible to do so by just going to the column or the block that we have and specify the grid columns and grid rows that we have there. So by default, it's set to auto, as you can see, auto out of auto, but we can change that again, thinking that we start with the row and then the columns. So 1, if I start at column 1, and I want to start. If I start, of course, of column and one, one, and it can be that we span, I don't know, let's say two and two. Remember, this is the line, so we start at one and first row and first column, and now I've specified two, which is two here and two here, so that didn't change anything. I was already there. So let's specify instead the line three, like that. So line one, line two, line three. So my grid should be spaced a little bit more. Spacing is optional here, by the way. Oh, sorry, my mistake, my mistake. I just noticed that we have columns and rows on two different elements, so I need to put just two values here, just for the columns and just for the rows. So I don't really need to specify any columns here. I can start at one and three, just like that, and there we go. Now we have what I wanted. So this one has two column height. Now this one, maybe I could remove it so that we can focus on this one. Um, Also, let me get rid of that so that they are all equal. Okay, or I can simply instead specify it. Let's say 2 rem. Whoa, that's not big enough. Let's say 200 pixels. Okay, no one spend time on that. But you understand now that these will be different. This one is the first one that takes 2 rows of height, or from line 1 to line 3. This is what we have right there. Okay. We can also move them, by the way. So for example, if that one, I want to do the same thing, but I want to move it to the second column. So I would specify simply that here. So second column, and go to line, let's say 4, because 3 is the default. You see that now it starts at line 2. Line 3 is there here, that you don't see it, and line 4 is there. So we can do pretty complex layout doing something like that. And let me show you one a little bit more complex layout. I didn't want to go too complex, but let me just, maybe for the sake of the exercise here, just hide this one so that we don't get confused, and show that one that I already done. So this is the, let's save that and refresh it. This is the end result of the grid. So this is a blog grid. I have a couple of dummy posts here just to be able to show it to you. And what we did is, well, let me simply show it to you. So I have here a blog container, or a section, my container that is there, which is set to display grid. And I have a little gap of 2 rem between each of them. Okay. Then I have divided that to fractions, okay? So 2 fractions, 4 fractions, 2 fractions mean we have 3 columns, okay? And of course, the middle one has twice the size as the side ones. So that means that my first block here will be in the first column, my second block will be in the second column, and my third block will be in the third column. Now, these are not just regular blocks. These are blog posts. These are query loops. So we'll have more than one element in certain of them. So my first block here, I have a little query loop, as you can see here. And what I have inside of that is simply that I want to show no more than 2 posts. My first is set to 2, and this is for those 2 posts here. Sorry. This one and this one. Okay, the first column. So I only have one element here, of course, but remember that since it's a query loop, it will repeat it. So this is for my 2 elements that I have here. So 2 posts per page. I've set to 3. I have set an offset simply because some posts don't have any image, like this one doesn't any have any image. So that's why I have upset it. But don't think about that. That has nothing to do with the grid itself. Also, I have added some little things here that are not necessarily good for the example. So this is the only thing that we need to know. And instead of that, of course, I have my post title, my image, and some rich text for my excerpt. So the first column that we see visually here in my end page is the first fraction of my container, which takes 2 fraction of the entire width. My second block, which takes 4 fraction, double size in other words, middle one, I have simply set it to be just one post. I still use query loop, but I set it to be one post instead. And I offset it differently so that I see the second one. And you see that this one now has a grid column 2, 3. So that means that I start at column 2 or line 2 and I stop at line 3. If I don't do that, by the way, okay, if I get rid of that, you see that all the others will go beside it. Let me get rid of both of them and let me show you the result here. You see, it has moved to the second position, but now all the layout, of course, is changed. And you see that the one that is supposed to be in the middle is this one. This one has longer extract text. All the others are shorter. So we know that this is the one that is supposed to be the big one in the middle. But it's not in the middle anymore because I didn't specify any specific uh, place to start. But I did for this one, I think. No, didn't either. Okay. So let me go back to that one. Let me set it back to what it was, which was from memory 2, 3, and it was 1, and it was taking the 3 rows, something like that. Here we go. So if I explain, we start on the second column, second line here. Remember the lines that we had here. So start on second line, which is as third the first column in a certain way. And we stop at line 3, which is this one here. So this is what I do here. And after that, for the row, we do the same thing, line 1 and 3. So I start at line 1, 2, and then, of course, I have line 3 here. So that means that this one is taking the entire height from 1 to 3. That's what I do here. So that's why this one takes the entire height of our block section. And the last one is simply a copy of the first one. So same thing, automatic. We have just 2 posts. I just offset a little bit higher so that I don't take the same post as those. So we have 3 different query loops here to do my little layout. Of course, I could have done that differently, but know that if I would have just used one block, of course, I don't have the manipulation available for all the blocks. So I would have to do it differently. We can use repeat here, by the way, in this place here. So I know that some I've shown that to you. So maybe I could pretty well. I don't want to confuse you with that one. That one will be probably more confusing than anything else. So let me go back to the first one here. And if I want to do some little manipulation here with repeat and things like that, so let me just get rid of those. Back to regular columns. Okay, let me get rid of that as well. Here we go. So I could say repeat, for example, number of times that I want to repeat in my case is going to be 3. So that means 3 columns. And I want to repeat one FR 3 times. So we have 3 equal columns. Of course, I could say that I want to repeat 2 3 times. So it's going to do the same thing since each take the same amount of space. So when you want to have something that is the same size, then repeat can be a function that you can use that is going to be a lot faster. So for example, if I have 5 different columns right now, I could say 5 1 FR and everything will be on the same line. Okay. So of course for 2 or maybe even 3, it can be faster to just type them. But this is how we can if we want to have all the same size, of course, because it's going to put them the same way. Now, of course, I could do something like 3FR and then repeat 2FR1. So that means that the first column will have 3 fractions. And now we have 2 times 1 fraction. So 2 times 1 fraction. So we have 3 columns in total, but those 2 take 1 fraction, and this one takes 3 fractions. So we can combine, we can do calculation, we can do max min, and others. I've showed that to you as well, so don't want to go into that. I think I already gave a lot of information here. This video is starting to be very long for a short video, introduction video. So anyway, you can go for yourself. And like I said, go watch the CSS Grid information in Brits. Go also watch the W3 schools, and particularly go watch the Pinegrow. Even if you don't have Pinegrow, I think that's the best way to understand how each of those elements work in a CSS grid. So hope you enjoyed that video. Please put a thumbs up if you did. And of course, I really enjoy when you put some comments below the videos. So wish you a good day. And right now we are 3 days before Christmas, right? The time that this video was released and that 161 was released. So I wish everybody, of course, a Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year. Thank you and have a good day.